Title: The Carnivorous Symphony of Nebula X. The darkness between the stars was never truly silent. In the far reaches of the Nebula X quadrant, where light bent and twisted like liquid fire, a spacecraft drifted, hollow and wrong. The Elysium Waltz, once a gleaming symbol of interstellar luxury, now resembled a derelict mausoleum. Its hull was pitted and scarred, pulsating faintly as if alive, or pretending to be. Inside, Captain Valka Trin stared at the terminal with bloodshot eyes. The words on the screen blinked mockingly. Unidentified organism detected. Initiating Protocol 666. She swore under her breath, her voice thick with exhaustion and laced with something deeper. Fear? No, not fear. She'd passed that threshold hours ago. The ship had started humming. Not the usual mechanical thrum of engines, but an unsettling, melodic vibration that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The rest of the crew, once a boisterous mix of traders, scientists, and thrill-seekers, were either missing or changed. Valka shifted uneasily in her chair, the memory of First Officer Torvin's last words gnawing at her sanity. He had whispered something incomprehensible before his head split open like an overripe fruit, releasing a spray of phosphorescent spores that filled the air with a scent like burnt sugar. His body had not remained still. It convulsed, bones cracking and reshaping into grotesque angles, as if a puppet master was trying out new designs mid-performance. The hum grew louder, resonating through the ship like an unholy hymn. 3 days earlier, the Elysium Waltz had intercepted an encrypted distress signal. Against Valka's better judgment, and under pressure from the investors funding their mission, they followed the signal to a rogue asteroid spinning at the edge of the Void Crescent, a region shrouded in cosmic superstition. The asteroid was an abomination, a floating carcass of alien origin, its surface crawling with what the onboard xenobiologist eagerly called bioluminescent tendrils of unknown composition. No one mentioned the subtle shrieks that seemed to echo when the tendrils were disturbed. No one questioned why the signal kept repeating words in an ancient Earth language, one that should have been long dead. Join us. Sing with us. Breathe us. Dr. Marin, the xenobiologist, had been the first to crack. She returned to the ship with a giddy smile, clutching a fragment of the asteroid that pulsated like a beating heart. She babbled about communion and enlightenment before locking herself in the lab. By the time anyone thought to check on her, she had fused herself to the fragment, her body stretched and woven into a lattice of glowing sinews. The fragment, her new body, began to sing. Valka clutched her sidearm, though she doubted it would do much good. Whatever was on this ship was no longer playing by the rules of biology, physics, or sanity. Her boots echoed down the corridor as she moved toward the central hub, where the crew's final recording had been transmitted. The walls seemed to exhale as she passed, their once sterile surfaces now slick with a substance that shimmered like oil on water. She reached the hub and found Ensign Ray, or what was left of him. His body was twisted into a grotesque parody of itself, limbs elongated and curling like branches. His mouth hung open, emitting a sound that wasn't quite human, a mix of laughter and sobbing, overlaid with something mechanical. His eyes followed her, empty but alive, as if a fragment of Ray's consciousness was trapped in the flesh that betrayed him. Captain, the voice didn't come from his mouth. It resonated from the air around her, layered and wrong. Why resist? The song is beautiful. It is freedom. Valka ignored the voice and accessed the terminal. The last log entry was a video. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the playback button. Somewhere down the corridor, the humming crescendoed, punctuated by wet, slithering sounds. The video began. It showed the crew gathered in the mess hall, laughing and drinking as if the horrors of space had no hold over them. Then the lights flickered, and the music from the entertainment system warped into a discordant wail. The crew froze, their smiles stretching unnaturally wide, teeth cracking as they grinned beyond human capacity. The screen erupted into static, but not before Valka glimpsed the source of the madness. A figure in the corner of the room, barely visible. Its body was fluid, shifting between forms. A human silhouette one moment, a writhing mass of tendrils the next. You've seen me now, the voice in the room whispered. Valka spun, weapon raised, but the corridor was empty. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps as the temperature plummeted. Frost formed on her visor, and her own reflection stared back at her, grinning. You cannot escape the song, Captain, the voice said, now louder, a cacophony of tones that made her teeth ache. You are part of the symphony. The hum was everywhere now, vibrating through her skull. The walls pulsed with rhythmic light, mimicking a heartbeat that wasn't her own. She staggered, dropping her weapon as her vision blurred. Images flashed in her mind. Alien landscapes drenched in colors that defied description, figures dancing in geometric patterns, and endless voids where stars wept. Somewhere in the chaos, a fragment of her will remain intact. She reached into her pocket and retrieved the emergency disruptor, a device meant to sever neural links in the event of hostile AI takeover. It wasn't designed for this, but it was all she had. With trembling fingers, she activated it. The hum stopped. For a moment, there was silence, absolute and suffocating. Then the walls began to scream. What should have been inert metal contorted, faces pressing out from the surface, mouths wide in agony. A figure emerged from the shadows, its form ever shifting. It spoke in Valka's voice. You cannot silence the song. You are the song. Valka raised the disruptor, her heart pounding. She fired. The figure dissolved into a swarm of glittering particles that danced in the air like ash. The walls shuddered, and the ship's artificial gravity failed, sending her sprawling into the void. As she floated, the humming returned, fainter now but insistent. It whispered promises of peace, of unity, of eternal life. Valka closed her eyes. Valka's body floated through the corridor as the ship swirled around her. The gravity's collapse turned every surface into an abstract plane, disorienting her further as the humming sank deeper into her consciousness. The disruptor, though temporarily effective, had begun to overheat in her hand. It emitted a shrill whine, its casing cracked and glowing faintly. I can't, she whispered, more to herself than anything. Her voice was swallowed by the vacuum-like silence, interrupted only by the unnerving pulse of the ship's walls. They convulsed rhythmically now, moving like lungs struggling to breathe. Then came the voices. Thousands of them. No, millions, overlapping, blending, echoing, but still distinct. The sound reverberated through the chamber, bypassing her ears and lodging itself directly into her brain. They spoke in unison, yet each voice retained its individuality, a fragmented chorus of agony, ecstasy, and something incomprehensible. Sing with us. Be more. Valka clutched her ears instinctively, though she knew it was futile. No, she gasped, kicking off a nearby wall to propel herself through the weightless void. Her legs trembled with effort, but her direction was meaningless. The corridors had shifted again, looping and twisting in ways that defied logic. Every turn led her back to the same central hub, where Ray's mangled form still convulsed in a nightmarish dance. Captain! The thing that had once been Ray crooned, its voice dripping with mockery. This is the only way forward. You know it. Why struggle? Its mouth stretched wide, revealing a gaping void filled with swirling lights. Just one note, and the song will embrace you. Valka fired her sidearm. The energy bolt ripped through Ray's face, or what remained of it. The wound didn't close, but it didn't bleed either. Instead, a soft glow emanated from the jagged hole, and his body convulsed more violently, tendrils sprouting from his chest to anchor themselves into the pulsating walls. The hum grew louder. The disruptor beeped weakly, signaling its imminent failure. Valka gritted her teeth and pushed forward. The ship's layout was a labyrinth now, corridors folding in on themselves, doors leading to nowhere or opening directly into the void of space. She relied on muscle memory, ignoring the way the environment shifted, how the walls occasionally bled or whispered her name. She found the engine room, or at least what was left of it. What should have been rows of turbines and control panels was now an organic cathedral. The machinery had transformed, veins of alien tissue threading through its mechanisms like parasitic vines. The central reactor pulsed with a sickly light, and she realized with dawning horror that it wasn't just a reactor anymore. It was alive. Figures writhed around the reactor, their forms human but grotesquely altered. Crew members she recognized, Han, Morales, even Dr. Marin, were fused into the structure, their bodies stretched and reshaped into unholy configurations. Their faces turned toward her in unison, eyes glowing with the same ethereal light. "You are late to the crescendo," they said as one, their voices harmonizing in an otherworldly melody. "Join us, Captain. Be part of eternity." Valka raised the disruptor, her hands shaking. She knew she couldn't destroy the reactor. It was the only thing keeping her alive in the unforgiving vacuum of space, but she could disrupt its connection to the rest of the ship, at least temporarily. Before she could act, the ground beneath her shifted. Something enormous unfurled from the shadows, its form utterly alien. It was a writhing mass of tendrils, eyes, and shifting geometry, each piece of it defying the rules of perception. Looking at it too long made her stomach churn, as though reality itself were rejecting its presence. The entity spoke, its voice a choir of madness. "You seek to sever yourself from us, but you are already part of the harmony. Every step you take echoes in the symphony. Every thought, every breath, it is ours." Valka screamed, firing the disruptor at the creature. The device sputtered, releasing a burst of energy that struck the entity. For a brief moment, its form rippled and faltered, the harmony in its voice distorting into a cacophony of pain. But the victory was short-lived. The disruptor died in her hand, its circuits fried. The creature surged forward, and she was swallowed whole. Valka awoke in darkness. Not the kind of darkness that came with the absence of light, but a sentient void that seemed to pulse with awareness. She felt no gravity, no sense of direction, only the relentless hum, now so loud it seemed to vibrate through her very bones. Her body was no longer her own. Her limbs moved, but not at her command. She floated aimlessly, her fingers twitching in time with the alien melody. Somewhere, distantly, she could hear herself humming along. "Captain Valka," the voices called, softer now, almost tender. "You are so close. Why resist the inevitable? Why deny your place in the cosmos?" She tried to scream, but no sound emerged. Her mouth moved, forming alien syllables that she didn't understand but somehow knew were part of the song. Her mind fragmented, pieces of herself peeling away like petals, leaving behind something raw and exposed. She wasn't alone in the void. Other shapes moved around her, flickering in and out of existence. Humanoid forms, twisted and incomplete. They sang as they moved, their voices blending into the omnipresent hum. Some reached for her, their touch cold and electric, leaving trails of light in their wake. And then she saw it, the source of the song. A massive structure loomed in the distance, its form indescribable. It wasn't a ship, nor a planet, nor any construct she could recognize. It was alive, pulsating with energy, and she realized with chilling clarity that it was the true conductor of the symphony. The Elysium Waltz had merely been its instrument. The structure's surface rippled, and something emerged. An entity so vast and incomprehensible that her mind struggled to process it. Its presence filled the void, a godlike being of light and shadow, and as it gazed upon her, she felt herself unraveling. "You have done well to come this far," it said, its voice the sum of all existence. "Now sing with me, Valkatrin. Sing, and become infinite." Valka's final shred of humanity clawed at the edges of her mind, desperate to hold on. She had no weapon, no disruptor, no means of escape. The song swelled, filling her thoughts, her memories, her soul. It promised her peace, unity, purpose, but somewhere, buried deep within the cacophony, was a faint echo of herself, a stubborn refusal to surrender. She opened her mouth, and she screamed. Valka's scream tore through the void, a defiant rupture in the symphony's oppressive harmony. It wasn't a note of surrender, nor a cry for help. It was a primal, guttural outpouring of everything she was. Fear, rage, grief, and the shreds of her humanity clawing against annihilation. The effect was immediate. The symphony wavered, faltering like a poorly tuned instrument. The alien conductor, the vast, incomprehensible entity that loomed over her, shuddered. Its massive form dimmed, the blinding light within its core flickering erratically. "You resist," the being said, its many voices layered and broken, as though speaking through static. "This is meaningless. You cannot exist apart from the song. You are already part of us." "No," Valka growled, her voice hoarse but fierce. "I'm not yours. I'll never be yours." Her scream had cost her. Her mind was fraying, her grip on reality slipping further. The void around her pulsed, the figures of other trapped souls flitting closer, their features distorted and mournful. They reached out to her, their hands trembling as though caught between yearning and restraint. "You cannot sustain yourself in isolation," the voices whispered. "The harmony offers purpose. Without it, you will shatter." Valka closed her eyes, blocking out their words, their pleading expressions. Somewhere deep inside, she felt something stir, a memory, distant but vivid. It wasn't a specific moment, but a sensation. The rush of adrenaline as she piloted the Elysium waltz through asteroid storms, the camaraderie of her crew before they were twisted into monstrosities, the sheer, stubborn will that had carried her through countless trials. She was a survivor, and survivors didn't yield. The conductor reasserted itself, its fractured form solidifying. The symphony surged, the hum intensifying into a deafening roar that pressed against her skull like a vice. Valka's body convulsed, her muscles locking as the alien melody tried to claim her entirely. "Enough," the entity declared. "You will become. There is no alternative." Valka's eyes snapped open, bloodshot but blazing with defiance. The hum still filled her head, but now, beneath it, she could hear the faintest trace of a counterpoint, discordant, chaotic, but undeniably hers. It was the sound of her scream, still echoing in the void, resisting the perfect harmony. And she had an idea. The void around her writhed as she reached for the remnants of the disruptor, still clutched in her hand. It was dead, its circuits fried, but Valka wasn't looking for its functionality. She focused instead on its casing, specifically, the volatile energy cell embedded within. The conductor's many eyes turned toward her, its tendrils extending like an advancing tide. "You cannot destroy what is infinite," it warned, though its tone betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. Valka grinned, her lips cracked and bleeding. "Maybe not, but I can sure as hell make it hurt." With a grunt of effort, she tore the energy cell from the disruptor's casing. The raw power it contained was unstable, a last-resort failsafe designed to prevent enemy capture of the device. If detonated here, in the core of the symphony's influence, it might not destroy the conductor, but it could disrupt its hold long enough for her to escape. "Do you really think you can sever yourself from the symphony?" the entity asked, its voices now tinged with mockery and anger. "You are already bound to us. You sing, even now." Valka felt the truth of its words. Her lips were moving, faint melodies escaping without her consent. But she focused on the energy cell, her fingers trembling as she activated its manual override. "No," she said, her voice cutting through the hum. "I'm not part of your song. I'm writing my own." The energy cell detonated in a burst of blinding light and concussive force. The void itself seemed to scream, the symphony collapsing into discord as the shockwave rippled outward. The figures around her dissolved into fragments of light, their mournful expressions briefly replaced with relief as they were freed from the harmony's grasp. The conductor recoiled, its massive form shattering like glass. Its many voices howled in pain and rage, but the sound was no longer harmonious. It was a cacophony, broken and desperate. Valka was thrown backward, the force of the explosion propelling her into the endless black. The hum faded, replaced by silence so profound it felt oppressive. For a moment, she thought she might have died. But then, she opened her eyes. She was back on the Elysium waltz, though the ship was unrecognizable. The walls no longer pulsed with alien life. The slick, organic growths had withered into ash. The lights flickered weakly, revealing corridors strewn with debris and the lifeless remains of her crew. Valka's body ached, her muscles protesting as she pushed herself upright. Her head throbbed, but the hum was gone, truly gone. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, her thoughts were her own. The terminal in the central hub flickered to life as she staggered past it. A distorted image appeared on the screen. Herself, staring back, her features hollow and exhausted. "You severed the link," the image said. Its voice hers but distant, echoing. "But the song isn't finished. It never ends." Valka smashed the terminal with the butt of her sidearm, sparks flying as the screen shattered. "I'm done singing," she muttered, her voice rough but resolute. She stumbled toward the cockpit, her legs unsteady but determined. The ship's controls were functional, though barely. As she keyed in the emergency jump sequence, she glanced out the viewport. The conductor's fractured form lingered in the distance, its light dim but still flickering. It wasn't dead, but it was weakened. "You'll have to find another instrument," Valka said, her voice a quiet snarl. The jump engines roared to life, and the Elysium waltz vanished into the void, leaving the shattered symphony behind. For the first time in what felt like lifetimes, there was silence. The silence didn't last. Valka slumped in the pilot's chair, staring at the cracked view screen as the Elysium waltz hurtled through slipspace. Every console around her flickered with warnings. Hull integrity critical. Life support failing. Reactor core unstable. ***, each alert chimed like a death knell, but she couldn't bring herself to care. Her mind was raw, her body trembling with exhaustion. It wasn't over. She could feel it. The faintest trace of the hum, so soft it could have been her imagination, lingered at the edges of her perception. She shook her head violently, trying to banish the sensation, but it clung to her like a shadow. "Pull it together," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the alarms. "You're not done yet." The ship groaned as it exited slipspace, emerging into a starfield unfamiliar and cold. Valka didn't recognize the coordinates. Either the NAV systems had scrambled during the jump, or she'd gone farther than intended. Wherever she was, the stars were sparse, the darkness between them vast and oppressive. She reached for the comm panel, her fingers hesitating over the controls. Was there even anyone left to contact? Was there any point? She tapped the button anyway. "This is Captain Valkatrin of the Elysium Waltz. If anyone's receiving this, I need assistance. The ship is compromised. Crew is gone." Her voice cracked, and she swallowed hard. "If you can hear this, respond. Please." Static hissed through the speakers. Valka leaned back, closing her eyes. She knew better than to hope for a reply, but the silence was unbearable. She focused on her breathing, trying to steady herself, and then the static shifted. At first, it was faint, a distortion in the background noise, almost imperceptible. But as she listened, it grew stronger, taking on a rhythmic pattern. Her heart sank. "No," she muttered, shaking her head. "No, no, no." The hum returned, creeping through the speakers like a virus. It was weaker than before, fractured and uneven, but unmistakable. The melody twisted and warped, as if struggling to reassert itself. "You thought you could escape," a voice whispered, low and broken. It came from everywhere at once. Her earpiece, the consoles, even the very walls of the ship. "You severed the cord, but the song endures. You cannot silence us." Valka bolted upright, her fingers flying over the controls. She activated the ship scanners, searching for any trace of the symphony's influence. The readings were chaotic, filled with anomalies, pockets of radiation, temporal distortions, signals that defied explanation. The hum grew louder. "No," Valka hissed, slamming her fist against the console. "You're gone. I ended you. You don't get to come back." "We are endless," the voice replied, its tone almost amused. "You are the dissonance, the final note, and you will play your part." The ship's systems flickered and died, plunging the cockpit into darkness. Valka's breath quickened as she reached for her sidearm, though she knew it was useless against whatever this was. The viewport glowed faintly, the starlight outside twisting into impossible shapes. A figure materialized on the other side of the glass, its form indistinct but familiar. It was her. The reflection of herself stared back with cold, empty eyes, its mouth moving in time with the hum. "You're not real," Valka said through gritted teeth. The reflection smiled, a cruel, predatory grin. "Neither are you." The ship's interior shifted, the walls warping and pulsating as though alive. The cockpit dissolved around her, replaced by an expanse of darkness filled with faint, glimmering lights. They weren't stars. Each light was a fragment of something, a memory, a life, suspended in the void. Valka felt herself being pulled toward the lights, her body weightless and unresponsive. Voices echoed around her, familiar and alien all at once. "You can't fight forever, Captain," one voice said, soft and sorrowful. It sounded like Torvin, her first officer. "Why resist? It's easier if you let go." Another voice, Dr. Marin's, chimed in, bright and giddy. "You'll understand once you join us. It's beautiful here. You'll never be alone again." Valka clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "I'm not joining you. I'm not." The hum surged, drowning out her words. The lights around her flared, each one pulsing in time with the melody. She felt her thoughts slipping, fragments of herself peeling away like layers of skin. Memories, her childhood on Europa Station, her first spacewalk, the laughter of her crew, blurred and faded, replaced by the song. "No!" she screamed, her voice barely audible over the cacophony. A single light flared brighter than the rest, drawing her attention. It hovered just out of reach, pulsing erratically. Unlike the others, it didn't harmonize with the melody. It wavered, discordant and flawed. Valka reached for it instinctively. The moment her fingers brushed the light, the void shattered. The song faltered, the hum breaking into fragments. The voices screamed, their harmony dissolving into chaos. Valka gasped as she was thrown back into the cockpit of the Elysium Waltz. The consoles flickered to life, though the alarms had ceased. The hum was gone. She stared at her reflection in the viewport, half expecting it to move on its own. But it was just her, exhausted, bloodied, but alive. For now. The comm panel crackled. A voice broke through the static, faint but unmistakable. "Captain Trin, this is the salvage vessel Persephone. We picked up your distress signal. Do you copy?" Valka hesitated, her fingers hovering over the response button. She opened her mouth to reply but stopped, her gaze fixed on the flickering lights of the console. The hum was gone, but the silence felt wrong. She pressed the button. "This is Captain Valka Trin. I copy." The Persephone's voice was warm, almost relieved. "Hang tight, Captain. We're bringing you home." Valka leaned back, her grip tightening on the armrests. Home. The word felt hollow, its meaning eroded by the void. She didn't respond. In the distance, the faintest trace of a melody lingered, barely audible. And Valka closed her eyes. ##### final chapter, the final note. The hum returned in her dreams. It was faint, like a whisper carried by a distant wind. But Valka knew it was there, waiting. The faint melody threaded through her subconscious, trying to reassert itself. Each time it came, she fought it, waking with a start, drenched in cold sweat. But the melody was insidious, growing louder with every passing moment. The Persephone was a modest salvage ship, its crew lean and practical. They treated her with a quiet reverence. She was the sole survivor of a catastrophe they couldn't begin to understand. The captain, a grizzled veteran named Royce, rarely spoke, but his pitying glances said enough. "Once we reach the Sol system, the Interstellar Authority will want to debrief you," Royce told her one day. "They'll want to know what happened out there." Valka nodded absently. She hadn't spoken much since they found her, unsure of how to articulate the truth. How could she explain the symphony? How could she convince anyone that the ship wasn't the Elysium Waltz anymore, but something else, a vessel for a vast, alien consciousness? Instead, she focused on the view outside the small portholes, the stars racing by as the Persephone neared its destination. But the stars didn't bring her comfort anymore. They were reminders of the endless void, of the conductor lurking just beyond the veil of reality. The melody grew louder. At first, it was only in her dreams, but soon it crept into her waking moments. It manifested in the hum of the ship's engines, the static of the comms, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. She heard it everywhere, faint but insistent, worming its way into her thoughts. Valka tried to block it out, but it was no use. The symphony had found her again. One night, unable to sleep, she wandered into the Persephone's observation deck. The vast expanse of space stretched before her, stars glittering like shards of glass. She stared out at the void, her reflection superimposed on the glass. "You followed me," she whispered. The reflection didn't respond, but in her mind, she heard the conductor's voice. "You cannot sever yourself from us, Valka. You are part of the harmony, whether you wish to be or not." Her fist slammed against the glass. "I destroyed you. I ended your song." "The song is endless," the voice replied, its tone almost pitying. "You are merely one note in an infinite melody. You cannot escape what you are." The Persephone docked at the Interstellar Authority Station near Luna. The station was a bustling hub of activity, its halls filled with scientists, soldiers, and bureaucrats. Valka submitted to the debriefing process in silence, her answers clipped and vague. She knew they didn't believe her. The investigators nodded politely, their faces carefully neutral as she described the symphony, the conductor, the transformation of the Elysium Waltz. They chalked it up to trauma, to stress-induced delusions. But Valka knew better. Weeks passed. The symphony's melody grew louder, seeping into every aspect of her life. It haunted her every waking moment, a constant reminder of the conductor's influence. She tried everything to block it out: meditation, isolation, even experimental neural dampeners. But nothing worked. And then, one night, the melody stopped. Valka woke to an eerie silence. The hum was gone, but the absence wasn't comforting. It was oppressive, like the calm before a storm. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding. A voice broke the silence, soft and sorrowful. "It's time, Valka." She turned toward the sound, and there it was, the conductor, its vast, incomprehensible form contained within the small confines of her quarters. Its presence defied logic, a shimmering mass of light and shadow that flickered between dimensions. "You can't have me," she said, her voice trembling. The conductor's many eyes fixed on her. "You misunderstand. We do not take. You give yourself freely. You have already begun." Valka looked down at her hands. They were glowing faintly, the light pulsing in time with the melody she thought she'd silenced. She felt it now, deep within her, a resonance that wasn't hers. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "To lead the next movement," the conductor said. "You have carried the dissonance. You have resisted. Now, you will conduct." Valka stood on the station's observation deck, gazing out at the stars. The conductor was gone, but its presence lingered within her, a weight she couldn't ignore. She could feel the melody waiting, thrumming beneath her skin, ready to be unleashed. She had a choice. She could surrender, become part of the symphony, lose herself in its infinite harmony. Or she could silence it forever, using the fragments of the conductor's power now embedded within her. The price of resistance was steep. She would have to sever herself completely from the universe, cut off from life, light, and sound. It was a sacrifice that would leave her utterly alone, but it would ensure that the symphony couldn't spread. Her fingers hovered over the terminal, her decision clear. She initiated the sequence for the station's experimental quantum disruptor, a device designed to collapse entire star systems into silence. As the countdown began, she closed her eyes. The melody swelled, desperate and pleading, but she ignored it. "I'm writing the last note," she said softly. The disruptor activated, and the stars blinked out. In the silence that followed, there was peace. The end.